Welcome to POW Instruction. POW stands for Instructional Processes, What is Taught, Instructional Assessment, What is intended to be learned, and Intended Outcomes, What is to be measured. In this online course, we will look at assessment with a new lens. That is, traditionally, we view assessment as the final step of the process. In this video, we will describe the reasons why we have statewide and local level assessments. It is very helpful to define why we assess before jumping right into assessment. So what is the ESEA? The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 is the law that was originally passed as part of the Lyndon B. Johnson's administration. The original goal of the law was to improve educational equity for students from lower income families by providing federal funds to school districts. As a driving factor of the law, which has persisted with the Every Student Succeeds Act, this equity for all requirement ensures schools and students who require the most support are given that support. In the December of 2015, ESEA was reauthorized into what we now know as Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. ESSA was a bipartisan bill and was passed with bipartisan support. The ESSA law requires states and districts to ensure that all students, including children with disabilities, English learners, and other historically underserved groups, graduate high school ready for college and/or careers. In other words, the goal of ESSA is to ensure that all kids matter. This graphic from the Education Trust depicts some of the features of ESSA that are important for our conversation about assessment. ESSA has protections for vulnerable students, and it creates important leverage for parents, communities, and advocates to continue their push for equity and accountability. Statewide annual assessments must be aligned with the college and career-ready standards. ESSA also demands richer public reporting on academic outcomes and opportunities to learn for all groups of students. Also, there should be clear requirements that statewide accountability systems must expect more progress for the groups of students who have been left behind. And we should expect action when any group of student is consistently underperforming. This requirement draws attention to the narrowing the achievement gaps and focusing on improvement or progress for all students. The fifth requirement looks at providing resources to support teachers and leaders through transparent reporting on inequities in the rates at which low-income students and diverse student populations are assigned ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced teachers. And lastly, as we had with No Child Left Behind, ESSA continues to target federal funding to the highest poverty schools and districts. Let's jump into how these ESSA requirements play out in Montana. High-quality assessments are essential to effectively educating students, measuring progress, and promoting equity. Done well and thoughtfully, they provide critical information for educators, families, the public, and students themselves, and create the basis for improving outcomes for all learners. And when done poorly, or in excess, or without clear purpose, they take valuable time away from teaching and learning, and they may even drain creative approaches from our classrooms. As stated earlier, our academic standards or our assessments must include high-quality student academic assessments in math, reading or language arts, and science. In the case of science, the assessments must be administered at least one time during the grade 3 through 5 band, the grade 6 through 9 band, and the grade 10 through 12 band. Currently, we assess science with the MontCAS CRT in grades 4, 8, and 10. Now let's flip to the participation in these assessments. Why must assessments be equitable for all students? Annual aligned assessments are an important way of measuring student progress. They provide parents with objective information about whether their children are academically on track or not. They help educators benchmark the performance of their students against those across the state. And they give parents and the public an objective measure of how schools are doing at improving learning for all groups of students. For these reasons, our assessments must include all students, including students with severe cognitive disabilities. In this case, students who are eligible for the alternate assessment based on alternate achievement standards. We can only assess these students who are eligible for the alternate at a rate of less than 1% of the total number of students in the state who are assessed in this subject. Furthermore, in our discussion of participation of all students, our assessments for accountability, by a minimum, must annually measure the achievement of no less than 95% of all students and 95% of all students in each subgroup of students who are enrolled in public schools. Let's flip to the last section of the law that we want to focus on for this module. In ESSA, tests must be developed using Universal Design for Learning. You may be asking, what does this mean? Universal Design for Learning is a set of principles for curriculum development that give all students equal opportunities to learn. UDL provides a blueprint for creating instructional goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone. Not a single one-size-fits-all solution, but rather flexible approaches that can be customized and adjusted for individual needs. UDL is necessary because one size does not fit all. We all learn in very different ways and come to learning from very different backgrounds and experiences. Since individuals bring a huge variety of skills, needs, and interests to learning, UDL helps address this. The research shows that with all of our learning diversity, there are 3 primary brain networks which come into play for UDL. First, recognition networks, or the what of learning. 2, strategic networks, or the how of learning. And 3, affective networks, or the why of learning. For a deeper read on this topic, we suggest exploring the National Center on Universal Design for Learning. Now that we know a little more about the law and our role in POW instruction, we want to emphasize the principles for fewer and better assessments. Assessments should be worth taking. Testing should be part of good instruction, not a departure from it. A good assessment is aligned to the content and skills a student is learning and requires the same kind of complex work students do in an effective classroom or in the real world. They should be of high quality, thus resulting in actionable, objective information about student knowledge and skills. They should be time-limited. While it is up to the states and districts to balance instructional time and the need for high-quality assessments, we recommend that no child spend more than 2% of his or her classroom taking summative assessments. When assessment in the classroom is done right, there is way more to assessment than testing. Formative practice helps the teacher and, most importantly, helps the students. Assessments should be fair and supportive, including providing fair measures of student learning for students with disabilities and English learners. Accessibility features and accommodations must level the playing field so tests accurately reflect what students really know and can do. Also, assessments are one of multiple measures, which provide critical information about student learning, but no single assessment should ever be the sole factor in making an educational decision about a student, an educator, or a school. Lastly, assessments must be tied to improve learning. While some tests are for accountability purposes only, the vast majority of our assessments should be tools in a broader strategy to improve teaching and learning. In a well-designed testing strategy, assessment outcomes are not only used to identify what students know, but also inform and guide additional teaching, supports, or interventions that will help students master challenging content and material. This phrase and diagram reiterates the connection for reflective practice. Here are some questions to consider when defining our POW instruction. Why should you assess? Classroom assessment is among an educator's most essential educational tool. When properly developed and interpreted, assessments can help teachers better understand what their students are learning. How do you assess? Classroom assessments do more than just measure learning. What we assess, and how we communicate the results send a clear message to students about what is worth learning, how it should be learned, and how well we expect them to perform. When do you assess? With ongoing informal and formal classroom assessment, assessments allow educators to monitor teaching effectiveness and student learning, motivate and shape learning and instruction, gauge student mastery of required skills, determine whether students are prepared for high-stakes tests, and help students improve their own performances. Therefore, good evidence improves our instruction. We'll finish here. So assessment-driven instruction, which is the model used in POW, is instruction that is guided by, responsive to, information or data we have about our students. We are developing formative assessments, which are assessments for learning. These happen during the learning, not afterwards like summative assessments. Formative assessment, or assessment for learning, on the other hand, is also not an accountability tool, but a teaching tool. We can conduct assessments to make decisions about instruction before the learning process or during the learning process. Formative assessment describes the formal and informal processes used by teachers and students during instruction to gather information about learning, to determine the instructional needs of students, to revise what needs to come next in that learning, and to help directly improve that learning.